Well, I think, whenever we work on independent media projects, the governments who are in power, I think, see these as a threat because independent media means media that report equally and objectively about issues and about politics. And in particular, it allows equal time and equal coverage of political opposition. So when you have an authoritarian-minded government, or even a government that is very keenly bent on changing the rules of freedom of speech to their favor so that they can stay in power, promoting a media that covers all sides equally and fairly is a threat to these governments. So I think they do see it as threatening. They don't like giving their political opposition any extra time in broadcast or any extra print space, because they don't want to have to they don't want to have to share power. They don't want to have to give up power. They don't want to be thrown out of power. We're talking completely through democratic means, through voting. By the way, they don't want to risk. They simply don't want to have to risk election losses. I think that there was a period in the 1990s and first decade of this century where the forces of democracy were doing a much better job of making good reforms, and I think now you're finding that more and more governments, more and more individuals around the world are trying to bend those rules, and it's not just Azerbaijan; it's other European countries. If you look at Hungary, it's the same thing in Hungary. It's the same thing in even in other EU members, Bulgaria, Romania, where individuals who represent political parties that are focused on increasing their power are bending the conventions of democracy, and in some cases they're more severe than in others. And Azerbaijan recently has been a relatively severe case. We have a different understanding of what the treaty between the United States and Azerbaijan meant. We received money from the U.S. Agency for International Development to do this work. That work is covered under a bilateral treaty, a bilateral agreement between the two governments that says that the money that USAID uses for project work is to not be taxed, and so that we were doing this project work, and so our understanding is that the money shouldn't have been taxed. Then we found out that it's related to some other criminal investigation that we haven't been told what it's about. Steps backward that are being taken are hurtful to the individuals, even if from a broad historical sense, this is a short space of time, 40 years maybe, 30, 40 years that these setbacks might take place, but that's the better part of someone's lifetime. So it really is hurtful on an individual level. And that's where I think it's important that international NGOs step in to work with the people who are pushing for reforms. And IREX is still committed. If we receive funding and we are legally cleared in Azerbaijan, we will absolutely be back at work there. Generally, that the U.S. is still very committed to strengthening individuals around the world who are committed to democratic reforms. And one of the other things, by the way, that I hear is this idea that, look at the United States. It's been involved in spying scandals with the NSA. It's it's keeping prisoners in Guantanamo. Its use of drones. That just means that the United States is either some people say isn't also a democracy, or it's not in a position to be spreading democracy. But I think that's a distracting argument. It's what we would call a red herring, and I say that because certainly nobody's perfect, but the idea of democracy, the goal of democracy, isn't undermined by the mistakes that the United States has made for itself. It doesn't, the United States still has mechanisms in place to address these things internally. And yes, they do take time, and mistakes do happen. But the idea of democracy itself shouldn't be thrown aside because one of the practitioners, it happens to be one of the oldest practitioners of democracy, is making mistakes. The United States isn't the only democracy, and any mistakes the United States makes or any other individual country makes doesn't take away from the importance of democracy.